Conjuring was a return to the classical, elegant style of horror film, which was a surprise for people that knew Saw and Insidious and all that. Was that a conscious effort, or was that something that kind of get organically out of the material?
Uh, I've I've always been a big fan of classical filmmaking, and I think my filmmaking in general is very classical. Even Fast and Furious 7, right,
Yeah.
has a very classical approach to it as well in a lot of ways. I felt like with my first movie that I kind of became really well known for with Saw, that movie kind of gave the wrong impression of the kind of filmmaker that I would like to be or would like people to know me of as. So with Insidious, I started making a very conscious decision to start moving more into the style of filmmaking that I love, and eventually landing with Conjuring 1, the first one. I think that movie and the material really did allow me the platform to finally kind of showcase the kind of aesthetic that I gravitate to.
I was one of the people that underestimated you, and you have constantly blown expectations away. Is there anything you can't do? I mean, you've done so much stuff. Is there any genre that you can't tackle at this point?
I don't think so. I love, and I'm not saying that from an egotistical standpoint. I love all kinds of movies, and I grew up loving all kinds of films. Whether it's horror, thrillers, action, western, romantic comedy. I love all those kind of films, and it would be a dream of mine to be able to make something in all the genres.
You've got to have a little chip on your shoulder when, like, the idea of taking on something like Fast 7. I mean, that requires a little bit of that aggression and that bulldog mentality.
Yeah, I listen. I like most people. I grew up watching Michael Bay movies. I grew up watching James Cameron movies and Ridley Scott and Sam Raimi. And so the chance to finally kind of play on that big canvas, to paint on such a big canvas, was very exciting. It was fun, and they're not easy to do. They're extremely difficult, especially when there's so much money at stake,
Right.
and so many personalities as well. But I think that just allows me to grow as a filmmaker, and I'm glad that I find myself getting better and better with each film that I make, and I find myself growing with each film I make. So I'm glad I did not peak with my first film.
Horror fans are very savvy, and the audience is more savvy now than they've ever been. And because horror movies are so built on gags, how do you find the way to challenge yourself to find new ways to scare people because they are so familiar with all those techniques?
I think coming up with new gags that people haven't seen before is very difficult. Certain critics are very dismissive of scares in horror movies. They think that what makes a scary movie scary is just loud sound. I'm like, well, no, there's actually more art to that than just loud sound. The bad ones are created like that, but I try to aspire to do more than that. I mean, who doesn't love a good jump scare, right?
Yeah.
But they still take a lot of crafting leading up to those jump scare moments, and so. So I pride myself in trying to come up with new things that we haven't quite seen before, and really try to make an effort. And I love the horror genre, and I think it gets shit on a lot, and I work very hard to try and bring as much respect to it as I could, because I really respect it, and I want the world to respect it as much as I do, and so I kind of see it somewhat as my duty to try and make the films I make that grows beyond just the horror community.
Well, the connective tissue in The Conjuring was so good that you cared about the people. It was amazing.